I'm Doug, and welcome to Doppler's Gear Garage for the first in a series of videos on the MESA Boogie Mark IIC Plus reissue. Like my original amp, this is available as a head or, like this amp left the factory, as a 112 combo. So the goal of this video is to really let the amp do the speaking. It's so incredibly musical, and all the demos really reflect my reaction across a range of styles with different guitars that I had to this amp. I just love it. Like you're seeing now, I've meticulously documented the settings, and of note, take a look at the bass control there. So one of the interesting things about these amps is that when you're going for higher gain settings, you basically turn the bass to 0. In a future video in this series, I will be talking about how to dial in things, but in this particular case, if you're looking for some jumping off starting points, if you've got one of these guys yet, you can use these tones if you're so inspired. This next demo is really kind of one of my favorites for a range of reasons. Besides doing all the heavy stuff, which is what this amp is most famous for, given Metallica and, I don't know, Dream Theater, etc., it also has a phenomenal clean tone. And this amp is a Simul-class amp, which means it can either run as Class A, B, and A at the same time, Simul-class, or with the switch in the back, you can just run it at Class A, which is great for vintage California-style tones. Let's take a listen. As I mentioned before, for that demo, I was running the amp in Class A mode, which is really integral to the way I was able to capture the sound of this guitar. Per the settings, over to the right there, you're going to see the switch that in the upper position gives you Simul-class mode, and the lower position brings you to Class A. Basically, what that does is it switches the two innermost tubes that are always running in Class AB mode out of the circuit to just the two outer tubes that are running Class A triode. And the amp is behaving less efficiently, but what it does, it kind of softens the edges, brings the guitar back a little bit if that's what you're looking to do. And for that type of a sound, one of my favorite things that I was able to get is I'm able to dig in a little bit without it getting harsh, and you can almost hear what I like to describe as the pick dancing on the strings. Just love that. Moving on. At the top of the video, I said I was going to let the amp do the speaking, but there are times the gear speaks to you, and it's important to kind of share what it's telling you, especially for those of you that maybe haven't had a chance to spend time with a Mark IIC Plus or with the reissue. So with that said, I want to point out that down below, there are chapter markers, and if you want to get to the highest gain sound coming up, it's at the very end. It's utilizing the same clean tone you just heard, along with this amp with one of the most beautiful lead tones I've ever heard. Amazing. And you can tell by the look on my face, I'm just like, holy cow, this is great. So if you need to jump down the timeline, have at it. My feelings won't be hurt. So here's the deal, though. That particular clip that we just heard brings up a couple of really important points about how to use the amp and kind of understand a little bit about the ecosystem. Back in the day, the Mark IIC Plus was available as a base model of a 60-watt 26L6 amp running in Class AB. Then you had options that you could add on top of it. Really, Boogie was the first boutique amp builder where you could just say, I want this, this, and this, and you would get it. This would have been referred to as an HRG. The 6100 option, the H, the R, reverb, the G, graphic EQ. This would have been a DRG. That would have been basically Simul-class. I think the D had something like maybe dual class or something. And at that point, the S was taken for the 60 watts that I just referred to. In any case, DRG, standing for Simul-class, reverb, and graphic EQ. The key difference feel-wise, this has more of a liquid feel because of the Simul-class, where this has a tighter feel. This is the basis for the JP2C. This is the quote-unquote Metallica amp. But the DNA of these two amps, very, very similar. So what I was doing in that demo, taking a look at the settings there, unlike the last demo, now I've got that Simul-class switch back up in Simul-class mode because I really want to tighten things up. The other thing is I've brought the volume 1 all the way down from 10, much lower. And in turn, I brought the master volume up. So I'm really getting the tightest response and the most clean headroom out of the amplifier, because when you add compression, chorus, delay, and reverb for that type of a sound, you want that clarity, unlike what I was going for in the previous clip. All right, now that clip and that tone, which I'm also using for the rhythm sound for that last demo, which is very much, if you will, inspired by or an homage to John Petrucci, however you care to look at it. People are going to ask, well, where's the Metallica tribute? I don't do the James thing. I love Metallica. I saw them at the Waldorf before Kirk was in the band. I saw Kirk when he was in Exodus. I'm a fan, but I can't do it. I mean, I can't do it. But there was a happy accident in coming up with that sound. So per the settings you're looking at, if you're looking to play the sound of James's JC120 on 1, and you've got this amp, grab a Boss chorus, because that's what's in the CE. I should say the CE1 is the chorus ensemble that's in the JC120. In this particular, what are you? You're a CE2W for Waza, right? And this has a CE1 mode. Basically, that is a great way to dial in that classic JC120 Metallica tone. I actually have audio for that, but I didn't want this video to get flagged because it sounded really, really close. So if you're wanting to get that tone, I at least want to tip my hat to you and say, I hear you. I'm sorry if I let you down, but I'd rather say, here's the settings and not do the high gain thing wrong. Call me a chicken. Fine. All right. So in any case, important thing about effects with this amp, like I said a moment ago, for the Petrucci thing, you really want to keep the amp tight. That's one of the reasons the clean channel on the JP2C is so tight, because when you're playing in that big an ensemble with that much music and all that stuff going on, the tightness really matters. Now, one other thing about these type of effects, the effects loop on this amplifier is a line level effects loop, which means if you run your Boss stomp in there and start turning the amp up, it's going to brown out that effect. And I learned this way back in the day, probably before you were born, on my first Boogie, a Mark IIB that I got from the factory in 1981. I've been doing the Boogie thing a long time. I love these amps. So the deal is you want to be conscious about what you put in the effects loop. Generally speaking, it shouldn't be a stomp box, with the exception of some stomp boxes do have a line or instrument level setting, so be conscious of that. All right, so getting back to that demo, one of the most beautiful sounds, and again, keeping things tight with the amplifier, such that when you add compression, chorus, delay, and reverb, you get this beautiful swelling of sound, but the core sound is still tight. Moving on. So that demo I affectionately refer to as Singing Kramer because of the vocal nature of that tone. Let's take a look at the settings. The second to rightmost knob is labeled lead drive. And if you look above it, it says pull lead, which basically means as it's illuminated in orange, that's engaged for this particular demo, which means I've engaged the lead mode. It's a one-channel amplifier. In rhythm mode, you basically are using the first set of controls, and then in lead mode, it engages the two rightmost controls for additional drive. Now, if you look to the right-hand side of the graphic EQ, there's a three-way toggle. The lower position, EQ in, which means it's active for both the rhythm and lead modes. The middle position, EQ out, which means it's not active at all, no matter what you're doing. And then the upper position, it's EQ auto, which means when you switch to lead mode, the EQ is there, because most people have a tendency to use the EQ only in the lead mode. It's a pretty smart way to set it up. All right, one last thing I want to point out about the setup there. If you take a look down below there, you can see that I've got just a little bit of reverb. And in terms of the effects that you've heard for the rest of the demos, all the sounds you're hearing, I'm coming out of the back of the amp into Cab Clone IR into my DAW. And so besides a little bit of amp reverb here and there, that sounds great. Any of the other effects you're hearing, I'm getting inside Pro Tools, generally with Universal Audio plugins. Awesome. Let's get to the next demo. So I've fallen in love with kind of the Americana style. And in particular, there I'm doing a couple of things with the amp that I want to talk about, especially in juxtaposition to the last track. All right, as you're looking at the settings, you can see that I've moved back to Class A, which means the amp is behaving less efficiently, less headroom. It's also pulled back a little bit. However, I've kind of goosed the treble enough such as added this little bit of snarl, so you get the juxtaposition of this kind of refined Gretsch sound, but with this snarl on the top that I just love. Moving on. One of my favorite things about this amp is I'm kind of constantly going, what can't it do? As I pick up a different guitar, it inspires me to play something, sometimes not exactly what I would expect to have played. For example, when I picked up the Dave Mustaine Kramer Flying V, and out comes kind of some swampy blues thing. Let's take a look at the settings. First and foremost, you'll notice that I don't have volume 1 set very high. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, that I was using the reverb moderately. For this one, I brought it up enough so you could really hear it. I think it's sitting right around 6, right? So the idea is that swampiness, it does that so well, and the built-in reverb does a great job of doing that. All right, the last demo. I'm going to jump to the settings for that in just a moment. I'm going back to the Majesty, that clean tone you heard up top with all the chorus and reverb and all of that stuff. And then I've dialed up, well, this lead tone. I want to talk about a couple of things about that. If you take a look at volume 1, and this is something that I learned in the trio of videos I did with John Petrucci and his longtime tech, Maddie Schifferstein, the sweet spot on volume 1 for higher gain tones, especially soaring leads, is somewhere right between 7 and 8. The other thing is you're going to notice I've got the other drive controls up relatively high. And the other happy accident that happened, and I've learned this lesson over and over with this amp, is traditionally we kind of dial in our tones visually, which is understandable. But really what I've done with this particular set of demos, I've tried to do is like, I don't know, let me just turn the knobs until it sounds and feels right, not based on what I would normally do. For example, if you take a look again where the bass control is set, one of the things about these amps is that when you turn up that preamp gain, you got to bring that bass way down. Sometimes at 0, sometimes at 1, but somewhere in there when it's really high gain. Otherwise, it gets floppy on the bottom end. Just bring it down. But the funny thing is that, you know, after dialing in all the tones and playing, I was like, oh, this is very exciting. I look back at the amp and the graphic EQ was in the off position. I was like, fancy that. In any case, thanks so much for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I want to invite you to do so. Don't forget to ring the bell so I can let you know when more videos are going to go online. For more information about this amp and all the other great products from Mesa Boogie, please visit mesaboogie.com. Thanks again for watching. Cheers.